think we can start. It's 7 o'clock.
Good evening, everyone. I extend my warm greetings to each and everyone present here. It's my proud privilege to welcome the speaker for today's session, Akash Gupta sir. I would like to take a few moments to introduce sir in a few words. Akash Gupta sir is an assistant professor and assistant director of the Center for Alternate Dispute Resolution at the Jindal Global Law School, where he specializes in teaching arbitration courses. Additionally, he is a visiting faculty at the National Law School of India, Bangalore, where he teaches his elective course, Advanced Course in Arbitration, Setting Aside and Enforcement of Arbitral Awards. He has completed his LLM in International Commercial Arbitration Law from Stockholm University, Sweden. Sir is also a recipient of the award Young ADR Academic of the Year by the Asia Pacific Center for Arbitration and Mediation in the year 2023. We welcome you, sir. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Kalpesh sir, VMSCL team, all the professors who curated this one of its own kind of a training program for moot competitions. When we had initially had a meeting with the VMSCL team and Kalpesh sir team, we were talking about how do we actually create this course in a way that it's going to be a very good learning experience for people who are interested in mooting. So they have divided several portions of this training. So two of the major topic have been given to me. One is today, the other one is tomorrow. So we'll be discussing about strategies, winning strategies tomorrow. So today the topic for me is oral advocacy skills and moot etiquettes. So I divide mooting into two parts essentially. One is the writing part, two is the oral parts. So far, what you have learned is more about how do you read the problem, how do you draft the memorandum, what are the citation styles. All of this has been already covered. Now, why is that so important that Kalpesh sir and the VMSCL team has given a separate module on oral advocacy? Why is that important? Anyone? Like, why do we need to understand oral advocacy? Is it actually required? Because once you have a very good memo, do you actually need to work on this? So, anyone who wants to answer this, what is the importance of oral advocacy? Because if you have a very good memo, which means you have a lot of good case laws, you have a lot of authorities with you, does that also requires oral advocacy? What's the importance of this? Let's start with this question and then we go forward. Okay, so somebody's typing on the chat box is improve communication body language. Please understand this. Whenever you go for a moot competition, okay, so I have done 11 in my law school and then I also did it from my LLM in Stockholm University. Please understand this. The moot competitions, some of them have some marks allocated to the memo, some marks allocated to the oral rounds. When you club both these scores, then the top 8 teams go to the next round. Okay, but please understand that's not the rule for all the moot competitions. There are several moot competitions, for example, this arbitration moot, where the memo marks are separate in nature and the oral marks are separate in nature. And memo marks has nothing to do with you going to the knockout stage, which means even if you have a good memo, it doesn't guarantee you a spot in the qualifying rounds, in the knockout rounds. Even if you have a bad memo, that does not mean that for sure you are not going to the next round. So please understand this, that it's two components which are there in the mooting. One is the written part, two is the oral part. Sometimes it's the combination of them, sometimes it's two separate things. For memo, you have a separate prize. For oral rounds, you have a separate prize. And usually when you look at the winner, it's actually majority of times, it's the oral rounds which actually provides who is going to win the competition. Because once you are in the competition, in the knockout stage, it's A versus B in the oral rounds. So you get points, 100 points out of 100 points for oral rounds. There is no calculation of memo marks once you get into the knockout rounds. Now, this is the reason why it is very important to work on your oral advocacy skills and your etiquettes. Okay. Now, what I have done, I have divided this whole session into three parts: pre-orals, during orals, and post-orals. Now, let's start with the first part. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, please feel free to write it on the group, on the chat itself, so that I can come back to your questions. Okay. Okay. Now, if we look at the pre-orals, let's start with the first point: scoring criteria. So, usually, the scoring criteria in different moot competitions are pretty much similar, but the majority of the moot competitions have these as criteria. One is organization and teamwork. Two is structure and content of argument, which is more like the legal part of the argument. Three is the presentation. When I say presentation, it's all about oral advocacy. It does not mean that what was the number of cases that you use, whether it was 2024 judgments, whether it was 2001 judgments. Presentation is more like your advocacy, how convincing you were. Okay. Last one is handling questions. If you look at the brochure for this particular training, one of the pointers in my session today is how do you respond to judges? So these are the majority of the scoring criteria in the moot competitions. So sometimes you need to also look at what is that your judges are going to mark you upon. Because unless until you understand the criteria, you can't start preparing for that. So please understand this and start reading the scoring criteria because it's already there in your moot brochures. Okay. So that's the first part you have to look at. Now, before you start, your mooting journey, you need to understand something. One is that you never get a second chance. Once you lose the confidence of the judges, you just lose out marks. So you have to be very sure, you have to practice so much that in the first instance itself, you have to get the attention of the judges. Second, how you look, it matters. When I say how you look, it matters, it doesn't mean that you have to put on a lot of makeup or you have to wear something very fancy, like, a fancy tie or something. I'm not saying that. How you look, it matters means that you can't play with your hair during the run. Okay. So how you look, it matters. For example, if you don't wear your blazer during the moot competition, it doesn't look professional. So you have to make sure that whatever is the dress code, whatever is the minimum criterion which is mentioned in the rule book, you have to follow that. Make the life of the judges easy. When I say make the life of the judges easy, it means you have to use a roadmap that what exactly you are going to argue, and you have to make sure that you travel throughout the journey of this oral session with the judge. You can't just start with the judge, leave the judge in the middle, and then you just go all alone, because who's going to give you the marks? The judge is going to give you the mark. So you have to make sure that you handhold the judge and you take the judge throughout the session, and you help him understand, you help her understand what exactly are the reasons that you represent your client and your client should get an order in their favor. Last one is your desk should look organized. So I have judged quite a lot of competitions, and I've seen that a lot of students keep a lot of papers. So they put, like, let's say, a big notebook, a small notebook, then there are certain books, then there are their ads. Then what you do is you use a lot of chits which are all over the table. Your table should look organized. Now, how you do it? It's fairly simple, that instead of keeping a script, you keep an A4 size. Okay. You write the bullet points, whatever you have to argue. For example, you are arguing two issues. Issue one, bullet points, some 1, 2, 3 cases which you think you have to use it. Then issue two, whatever you have to use it, but in bullet points, no scripts. And on the right side of the page, let's say if you are a responding party is this. Let's say I'm the claimant. I say that the contract has been breached, and you have to respond to that. You are a responding party. Then instead of using your own original structure, you have to use my structure. So if my structure is ABC, you can't start arguing with CBD. You have to say that I'm going to mirror the structure of the opposing counsel, and you have to use A, B, C as the order. So on the right side of the page, you have to make notes if you are a responding party, and you have to switch your whole pleadings right there with respect to the numbering and the structure. Any questions so far with respect to the first part of scoring criterion and the second one before you start? Any questions so far? So these are the things which I preempt. I have done moots, I have judged competitions. So these are some of the pointers which I want to share with you guys. But let's say if you think that there are some points missing or you have a question, please feel free to stop me and ask a question. Okay, and also with respect to your desk, don't keep too many things. One A4 size paper per speaker, you put a small chit, then you can put a small timer. A timer is like more like a digital clock, but it shouldn't have any sound because sometimes it starts ringing, and you can just put it on the table. The best part of that using a stopwatch, a digital one, is that you just keep it on the table and you can see it. The problems with phones is sometimes it rings, sometimes it goes blank, sometimes it hangs, sometimes the screen is off. So it's better to use that so that you follow time. Any questions so far? Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
You said about the how you look, it matters. So, can you explain it's regarding our dress code, our face reading, how should it be, and face reading, and how to judge the judge what trying to say or judge face reading? Can you just give
So
one?
when I say, yes, Rafik, I understood your question. When I say how you look, it matters. So let's say the rulebook provides that for a male, you have to wear a blazer and you're not wearing a blazer. Let's say the rulebook says that you have to wear a tie and you're not wearing a tie. That's what I meant when I say how you look, it matters. It's not like you should look very fancy or something like that. Not exactly that. Second is, you shouldn't be like doing things which distract the attention of the judges. For example, every time say I'm speaking, I'm the participant, and you are the judge in the moot competition. And every time I say something and then I do this, if Shah Rukh Khan does this, of course people like it. But when you do it in a moot competition, it doesn't look professional, right? So this is what I meant when I say how you look, it matters. Okay, some people have long hair, and then the problem is you keep on doing this, you know, and it's your habit. You don't realize it, but this is something which distracts. So either you tie your hair or you have to cut your hair. Doesn't matter whether you are male, female, whatever gender you are. So things which distracts, you have to stop doing that. Now coming back to the second part of the question, which you said face reading and all of this. Instead of getting into that because it's very complicated, I'll talk about how which kind of face you should have. It's very simple. Let's say if you have a very smiling face, if that's your natural facial expression, you should keep it. If you have a very serious face, natural expressions are always best. But if you ask me professionally what is the best facial expression, it's a poker face. Poker face is a neutral facial expression which you have throughout the rounds, unless until the circumstances demands you to smile or let's say to react or something. But I always say poker face, a neutral expression is much better, because if somebody asks you a very tough question, you still following the poker face, so you don't react to the question. Sometimes you must have faced this, that if I ask you a very tough question and I say that I have two questions for you, Rafik. First, blah blah blah. Second, blah blah blah. Your facial expression changes, but you don't actually realize that, because I asked you two back-to-back questions and you were like, why this guy is asking two questions? He should have asked one question, I should have given answer, then he should have asked second question. So how you actually make sure that you work on that, it's pretty simple, that you start video recording yourself, and then you practice with somebody, your senior, your junior, your teammates, your faculties, your mentor coaches, and then you record yourself and see whether your facial expressions change when somebody asks you questions, or when somebody asks you back to back questions, when somebody starts cutting down all your points. So this is how you should actually start preparing with respect to the facial expression, and this is something which I meant personally. How you look, it matters. Let's say if every time I ask you a question and you make a face like, why you are asking me this question? Of course, it matters. Okay, because understand this. Usually in the moot competitions, you have at least two, and on an average majority of the moot competitions, at least in the international ones, you have three judges. Understand this. Every judge is going to mark you out of 100. If one of the judge is of the opinion that you were, reacting to their questions, or you were very, disrespecting to that one judge, please don't think that you are going to lose only some points out of 100 marks. Please understand this, because that judge is also, there may be a chance that judge is also going to influence the other two judges. So you can't lose on one of the judge. The moment you do that, maybe that judge is going to influence the other two judges. Maybe that person is not going to influence the other two judges. So it's the ideal state which you have to look for, which is you have to get into the good books of all the three judges. Once you get into that, you get some chances of getting 80 plus. Then you have to start looking for getting 90 plus, so that you make sure that you go to the knockout rounds. Okay.
So, sometime it's happened like that. We are very confident, and we reach to the desk and just saw judges are very senior, or one judges are very smart, is smiling. One judges is very strict, and while facing this, observing the faces of the judge, we start to lose our confidence before the starting. So, can you point out something on this?
Okay. So here's the thing. The problem is that some of these students feel this or have experienced this because you haven't practiced this. Once you have done a lot of practice rounds with different set of judges, let's say your senior, your junior, or somebody who has done that move before, then all of this is already resolved. It's just that you do not practice for the oral rounds. Okay. And you go afresh to these competitions. And when you see a judge who is not even smiling, asking you a lot of questions, then you get scared and then you start fumbling right there. All of this, I have one of the pointers where I say that you have to practice and you have to do pre-moots. If there is no pre-moot, you have to make sure that you do practice rounds with your own setups. So this is how you actually, you know, fight this feeling of getting scared with these different set of judges. There is nothing better than doing practice rounds. Once you do that, then it becomes very easy for you because you have already experienced so many different set of people with respect to that moot problem itself. So this is what you should do. I see a question on the chat box. How important to know the background of the judge? And I will say that this knowledge about the background of the judge, I don't think it's required. In the Indian competitions, there is no way out that you can actually get the background of the judge, because there is very minimal set of moot competitions or ADR competitions which publish their set of judges or their arbitrators. So it's very difficult for you to know the background. But of course, if you talk about Jessup or Stetson, Viss, you get the list of arbitrators. So of course, you can look at their backgrounds. So in the international competitions, people look at those backgrounds. Why? Because let's say if I'm judging in Viss and I'm your arbitrator, people look for my profile, whether I come from common law, whether I come from civil law. The second thing, they look at whether I have done Viss moot before. So if they find that I have done it thrice, so they know that I know the basics of Viss moot already, so they can't do something which is so wrong under the Viss setup. Now this is something which you can get the idea in Viss moot, because there is a list of the judges, but not for the national moots. So I'll say, but that is not going to matter much if you have already done your basic practice and you have a good memo, the basics of oral advocacy, you are good with etiquettes, the body language rules, all of this. So not a lot in international moods, I'll say somewhat yes, but not in the national moods, because there is no way out that you are going to find out who is going to be your judge in the national competition. Okay, now let's go to the next part. Ground rules. Now let's talk about the first part. Always start strong. What does this mean? Let's say if I have to argue two issues. Let's say there are four issues. I and Professor Kalpesh are teammates. Okay, we have four issues to argue. We divide. First issue, second issue is with me. Third and fourth issue, Professor Kalpesh has to argue. Now, when we prepare the pleading, we have to make sure that in the issue one and the issue two, we only argue the most important, most useful, most strong pointers. We shouldn't argue everything from the memo. This is the misnomer in the student side. The students think that whatever you have written in the memo, because you have spent so much time with the memo, so you should include all of that. Not really. You have to start strong and you have to keep limited pointers within the submission. You can't argue everything. Why? Usually in India or even internationally, you will get 15 minutes per speaker, which will also include your rebuttals. So 1 minute is already gone, so you have 14 minutes. In 14 minutes, you can't argue everything from the memo. So you have to choose the most strong points and you have to only argue that. Second part is how do you address the bench? So you have to understand the moot problem first. If it's a high court, it's a different set of addressing to the bench. If it's a Supreme Court, it's a different addressing. If it's an arbitration moot, you have to check the arbitration rules, whether they use chairperson, whether they use presiding arbitrator, what do they call the senior arbitrator, the junior arbitrator. If it is International Criminal Court, it's a different set of salutations. So you have to make sure that you work on this when you read the problem itself. Okay. Third one is slow down. What do we mean by slow down here? Slow down is when you have the oral rounds, you must have experienced that some people have a very fast pace of speaking, some people are having a very low pace. I'll give you an example. When I went to Hong Kong for my Westmoot, my first round, I was speaking almost with this speed. And one of the arbitrator said this to me that you are going very fast. The arbitrator was a Chinese arbitrator. So please understand this. The words per minute for a for a Mandarin speaking person, for a person from India, it's very different. So you have to make sure that you tune your speech speed with respect to the arbitrators. But this is something which you have to make sure that it is relatable. It is going to be dependent on where you are participating in the moot competition, whether it's the Indian moot, whether it's an international moot, who is going to be the arbitrator. Now, the next one is the attention span of the arbitrators. Just give me a second. So the attention span of the arbitrators is limited. Please understand this. In one session, you at least have four speakers, which is going to almost be around 1 hour. Now, listening 1 hour with the full attention, it's very difficult. So if you are going to use everything from the memo, just a second. So the attention span for your judge is also limited. For example, that if you are going to use everything from the memo, important parts, the non-important parts, there may be a chance that because of the attention span, because it's going to be a very lengthy argument, you are using so many pointers, the judge will not understand that what is that you are focusing on. So you have to keep it short and simple. You have to choose one issue, maximum 2 pointers per issue, so that when the judge writes your roadmap, issue one should have 2 pointers, issue two should have 2 pointers. It's not necessary to use a lot of pointers to convince the judge. If you can convince with 2 points in one issue, the judge is going to write an order to decide in your favor. Okay. Structure of presentation is important. When I say structure of presentation, it's more like the pointers. For example, I have two submissions to make. Starting with my first submission, I have 2 points to make. A, B. That's it. Then you start with the A part, then you start with the B part, then you move to your second submission. Then it is very clear for anyone to understand that Akash is going to argue two issues. In both the issues, there are 2 pointers each. Okay. Be articulate, you have to be specific. The second last one is teamwork, and you count as a team, so behave as one. Now, how do you showcase that you are a team? Anyone? How do you get points for this? Because in all the competitions, you'll find that teamwork, collegiality, there is at least 20% marks. So how do you actually, get points for this teamwork? What you should do, what you shouldn't do? Okay, Shiva is saying research, but can you showcase research in the oral rounds? Of course, during the memo rounds, but you get teamwork points for the oral rounds, not for the memo rounds. Yes, Atik.
Yes, sir. I think we can pass it to our partner if our partner doesn't know the answer.
So you are saying that you can help your partner if the partner is not able to answer a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Definitely.
that's one. What else? Anyone else? Okay, one thing when I said about organizing your desk, when I said that you need to keep one A4 size paper for speaker number one and speaker number two, and then you put a small chit where you can write and paste it on your co-speaker's page, help them with that. That's there. But apart from that, there is another thing which you should keep on the table, which is a bundle where you have the problem. When I say the bundle where you have the plastic sheets where you put all the pages. Okay. The reason why I say that you need to use a bundle where you have the plastic sheets, because sometimes when you use a lot of times the same problem, it's going to be torn off. So it's better to use a bundle which has, the file with the plastic sheets. You highlight all of this. So you keep it in the middle. Okay. Let's say that if your competition is in a setup where both of you have to sit and argue. So let's talk about this for that matter, and the bundle is kept in the middle. So I have seen students having two different mood problems. And when they say that I have to refer to page 39 of the problem, what they start doing, they just start flipping pages, finding out what part and all of this. So it's better to organize your table like this, that you keep the bundle in the middle. When, let's say, if I'm saying that I would request the tribunal to draw the attention towards page 39 of the record. Professor Kalpesh is my co-speaker, and he flips the pages and he goes to page 39, and then he uses the pen, he goes to the exact part where I have to read, and then I say, by that time he's flipping the page, I'm saying that members of the tribunal, on page 39, there has been an email sent by the claimant to respondent with respect to the sales contract. By that time, the page is opened, and Professor Kalpesh highlights that portion, and then I start reading. Para 5, the second line provides for blah, blah, blah. Now, this is one of the way you showcase teamwork. Okay. But it also depends whether the setup allows you to sit and argue so that you can do this. One is, of course, helping your partner when the partner is not able to answer or partner needs your help. Okay. So the last part is end on a strong note. Now, what does this mean? It means that what you do, what you need to do is, just a second. Okay. Now, end on a strong note. Please understand this. When you start with your introduction in the oral rounds, you have to also end your oral session with a conclusion. Now, the conclusion has to be connected to your introduction. This is what I mean by end on a strong note. Okay. Now, let's go to the next part. Time management. Okay. Now, a question from my side. Let's say you have 14 minutes to 1 minute is the rebuttal time. Should you ask for extra time if you need it? That's question one. The second question is when you should ask. Let's say the total time allocated to you is 14 minutes of argument. When you should ask for an extension of time. Anyone? Okay. Mansi saying after its completion, after the time is over. Shiva is saying before 5 minutes before. Anyone else?
We can ask if we are not able to address issues properly.
Okay. I understood your point that if you think that there are some portions which you wanted to argue are left, so you want to seek an extension. Okay, very good. But when you ask for this, Sudiksha, one person is saying after its completion, other person is saying before 5 minutes. So it's a huge difference. Somebody is saying 5 minutes before the completion of time, somebody is saying after its completion. Yes, Atik.
Um, Sir, if we can ask more time, if uh, our topic is remaining, and we can ask just to extend the time for
That is
having
already
more
answered by
time.
Sudiksha. Now the question is, when do you ask for the extension? Diksha already answered it, Atik.
If our topic is incomplete, sir.
Exactly, Atik. I'm repeating it. So Diksha said the same answer. Now the question is, when do you seek for an extension?
Sir, before the 5 minutes, I can
Okay.
request
So
the judges.
Rafik is saying before 5 minutes. Anyone else? So it's two possible answers so far. One is after its completion, the other one is 5 minutes before. Anyone else? Okay. Guys, both of you are not right, unfortunately. Please understand this. Whenever, let's say you have 14 minutes to argue, 13 minutes, 20 seconds, 40 seconds before your completion, before you exhaust your time allocation, you have to seek for an extension. Okay, that's first part. Now, first question, when do you seek? It's answered. Second, when you ask for it, 40 seconds before your exhaustion. I think I'm really sorry, but let's wait for some time. I need to complete this point. The third question is how much time you should ask for. Let's say that you are seeking an extension of time. How much it should be? 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. What should be it? Atik, do you want to answer it?
I think, sir, it should be 1 minute, 1 or 2 minutes, or 30 seconds if you can conclude that.
Okay. Atik is saying it should be very less, something like 30 seconds, 1 minute, max 2 minutes. Anyone else?
Sir, I will ask to judges that I have remaining this much part. So instead of asking time, I will ask that I will complete this whatever portion is remaining to explain.
So if you have a portion which will take another 10 minutes, you'll ask for 10 minutes.
It is not possible to calculate the time that time.
But understand this, for time management, you get 20% of the marks. You ask something like this to the judge. On the other side, you have a team of me and Professor Kalpesh. What we seek is, we ask this from the tribunal that we seek an extension of 1 minute. Who should get more points for time management? You are saying that you are not even aware how much time you require. Then there is other team which says that we request for a extension of 1 minute. Now, with respect to the scoring criterion of team management, who should get more points? Do you
Sir,
understand?
if they complete within the 1 minute, then they will win. But if they not complete within the 1 minute, then it will be
Understand
an
this,
issue.
Rafik. What you say, completing the issues, you can have 10 issues to argue. You can have 20 issues to argue. That's what I said. Some of these students have 20 issues to argue per issue. But the good teams which qualify for the knockouts will have for one issue only 2 points. And that is, of course, possible to complete it within the time. And teams who do that, they go to the next round. So please understand this. Respecting time, following time will fetch you at least decent marks. Even if you're very bad with, let's say, your legal arguments, but if you follow time and you are having a good oral advocacy, you will get easily 70% marks because you are being smart with oral advocacy, with team management, with time management. So please understand this. First question, when you seek for an extension, when you actually require it, don't do it just for the sake of it because people are asking for extra time, so I should also ask time. Second is when you should ask 40 seconds before the exhaustion. Third, how much it should be, maximum 1 minute, 1 minute 30 seconds, 2 minutes. If in case, let's say, a judge is asking too many questions and you are of the opinion that the judge has took a lot of your time, and the judge will be happy to accommodate 2 minutes. But my personal advice is maximum 1 minute. Okay, so that's how you have to manage time. Now, the other answers, extra 3 minutes and all of this, if you come to my courtroom and you ask for 3 minutes extra, I have to deduct your marks. Understand this. If I give you extra 3 minutes, let's say Shiva wants extra 3 minutes, I give Shiva extra 3 minutes. Speaker number one from party A. Party B is Rafik Khan from the opposing side. I have to also give Rafik extra 3 minutes because I have to give equal opportunity of being heard, which means 3 plus 3, I have to stretch the pleadings 6 extra minutes. And if I do this with the first speaker, high chances that the second speakers will also ask for an extra time, which will turn into extra 12 minutes. Understand this. When I give you 12 minutes extra, in the other courtroom, somebody doesn't give anyone extra time. Do you think it's going to be equal playing field? So what is an equal playing field? That everyone should follow time. Why? Because it is provided in the rule book that you have 14 minutes per speaker to argue. So this is what we mean by time management. And majority of the scoring guidelines in the competitions will have this. So please start focusing on this and start working on it. Now the next point is body language. Now, what is body language? You must have seen that some people are, have this sitting style where they lay back on the chair. Some people leave their one third from the back of the chair and they lean towards the table and they are very much into the discussion. Now, both of them gives two different impression. So body language is very important. When I say body language, it includes everything. It includes eye contact. It includes whether you are sitting upright. It also includes your facial expressions when I ask you questions. And if you start making faces, that is something which is also going to convey me a lot of things. Okay. So you have to make sure that you work on this. And how do you work on this? It's very simple. One is that you go to YouTube, you write the final videos of Moot, Jessup, Stetson, all of the Moot competitions, final videos are already there on YouTube. You look at them, how they actually answer the questions, how they maintain their speech, what is their body language, and then you start doing practice rounds and you record your practice rounds. And then you start comparing your practice round with the best speaker on the finals of these Moot competitions. Then you will start realizing that what are the do's and what are the don'ts, and when you start comparing, you will understand that what things you were doing wrong. Some of us have this habit that every time you go to a Moot competition and you are ranked 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, you couldn't qualify to the top 8, and you have done 3-4 competitions, and then you start getting into a vicious cycle where you think that maybe I'm not worth it for this particular setup of moods. But it's just that you are not getting the feedback, you are not working on the feedback. If I ask you how many of you have already done this before, this exercise of comparing your facial expression, body language, eye contact, all of this, how many of you have done practice rounds, recorded yourself, then you'll get the answers yourself. Now, the next one is short, medium, and long pleadings. What does this mean? I'll give you an example for this. Let's say that you are on a road which is a market area in the city center and a lot of shops. Let's say you are driving a car. You can't use fifth gear and 100 kilometer per hour speed, right? You have to use first, second gear. You have to be somewhere around 10, 20 speed. But let's say if you're on an on expressway, let's say Taj Expressway, or you know other another expressway where the speed limit is 120. Can you start your car and you can drive at 20 kilometer per hour? No, you have to use your fifth, sixth gear. You have to run somewhere around 80 to 120 or at least 60 plus, right? The same thing also applies when you get a judge who is asking too many questions. Then you have to switch your gear to the shorter pleading. When I say the shorter pleading, it should be around, let's say, out of 14 minutes, a pleading of 4 to 5 minutes. Let's say you get a judge who is asking some questions but giving you room to also argue. Then you should go with the medium pleadings, which is more like 8, 9 minutes. If somebody is not even asking you a question, you have to go to the next year, which is more like 12, 13 minutes of pleadings. But you have to start reading the judge right there, whether that judge is asking questions, whether that judge fits into which one of these sector, short, medium, and long, and you have to switch the gear. Now, you can only do this when you have done the practice rounds and you have prepared 3 sets of pleadings. If you haven't prepared well in advance, short, medium, and long pleadings, how will you do it? And now this becomes the problem what Rafik was saying, that I have a lot of things left. So how much time I should ask, I don't know. But if you have already practiced this problem will never happen to you. Because if somebody is asking you a lot of questions, you switch your gear and you from the long pleadings, you go to the short pleadings. Now this is what you have to do. Now, roadmap conclusion I have already discussed. Storyline is, let's say, 3 to 4 sentences in the beginning when you start your arguments, which showcases that your client are the good guys. For example, in a contractual breach case, in an arbitration case, if I have to create a very simple storyline, I'll use something like this: that the respondent entered into the arbitration agreement and consented to resolve all their disputes through arbitration. However, when the time came to enforce its promise to arbitrate, the respondent is not following the arbitration agreement and has gone to the civil court and filed a suit against the claimant. And in this regard, members of the tribunal, I have 2 submissions to make. Starting with my first submission, I have 2 points to make. Now, this is what I say is the roadmap, is the storyline, and the introduction of your oral session. Any questions so far? Anyone?
Sir, on body language, just I want to ask you that if my voice is very loudy, inbuilt it is in loudy, and my habit is that I'm putting my hand on desk always. When my argument is there, I just put hand and make a noise on the table. Is it this bad body language is good or bad?
You are saying that you have a loud voice, and the second thing is that
Just I have a habit of the putting the my hand on table and make noise that this is point I'm saying is correct. So it is
I
is it
got
the
your question. Okay, so Rafik, here's the thing. I know that when Sunny Baji comes in Bollywood and he says Tariq pe Tariq, all of us love it, right? But please understand this: a moot competition or in the real life setup, you can be actually booked in a real life setup for a content. And in a moot competition, let's say if you go to a judge who has done, moot competitions quite a lot, and then you do this, I'll say it's dramatics. It's not professional, and it's a red flag. So loud voice, when you say loud voice, let's say if your tempo changes, when I ask you a question and then your voice modulation changes and then you become very loud, it means very demeaning to me. It indicates that you are being very disrespectful. Second, when you put your hands on the table and you make some noise, it's also a red flag. So I will not recommend it. Anything which is not professional, which distracts, you should not do it. As simple as that. I'll give you an example. What cannot be distracting? Let's say that you are my judge and you ask me a very tough question for which I have to think for, let's say, 20-30 seconds. So what should I do to get a pause of like 20 seconds? It's very simple. I'll put, a bottle, a glass bottle and a paper cup, but I'll not fill the water in the cup. So what I'll do, I'll pour the water and then I'll take a gulp of water, which will take at least 20 seconds. And by that time, I'm thinking. Now, this is something which does not distract the judges. But when I do this, making noise on the table, or let's say, changing my voice modulation, become very loud, that's something which is distracting. So these should come under don'ts, which you said. But let's say if you want to take a pause and you want to showcase it as very organic, you can do something like this. You take the glass bottle, you pour it, then you take a gulp of the water, then it's already 20 seconds, you think, and then you come back with the answer. So this is what you can do, but what you suggested, I will not recommend that. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Sorry for answering my silly questions, sir. Very
No
thankful.
worries, no worries. This session is all meant for clearing your doubts, so it's totally fine. Exactly what Anirudh is saying is actually right. Even if a judge is asking you a question in a very different problematic tone, but still you shouldn't be changing your tone. You have to stick to your grounds. Okay. So Anirudh is right actually. Now, do not interrupt when the arbitrator or the judge is speaking. So this is what we have been taught at Stockholm University, that whenever somebody is asking you a question, once they finish their question, in your mind, you count 101, 102, 103. The reason why 101, it's already 1 second. So you wait almost 2-3 seconds before you start answering the question. Sometimes people have a habit of saying something, they think, and then they have a follow-up. But when you interrupt the judge in the middle, sometimes they don't like it. So it's better to take a pause. Okay. So this is what I suggest in this regard. Poker face, we have already talked about this. Third point is very important. When a judge asks you to wrap up, you have to just conclude and finish your reading. Sometimes I have seen it, especially in Indian teams, that the student asks for an extension at 13 minutes, 20 seconds, sometimes even after completion of time. After 14 minutes have exhausted, they ask for extension. I give them a minute. They go on for the next 3 minutes. They don't stop. Even when I say that your time is already over, why didn't you just conclude? Then they say that my third issue is this. Or they ask me to refer to a page 39 or page 49 or whatever it is. When I say you have to wrap up, it means that you have to conclude, which means 30 seconds, and you just tell me 3 sentences, and you have to say thank you. Okay. So this is what a judge expects you when they say wrap up, because you are already over time. But a lot of students think that the more you argue, the more points you get. Not the mooting doesn't work like that. The more you argue, the more points you get. In that situation, people who copy paste their memo in their pleadings, they should win the competitions, but they never win it, right? So please don't do this, that when you ask for an extension, you just flout the time allocation again and again. Fourth is again very important. Do not argue when the judge asks you to wrap up. That I have one more point to make. I couldn't argue it because you asked a lot of questions. Sometimes it becomes an argument with the judge. Please understand this, that you are not going to mark the judge. The judge is going to mark you. So please understand this and just sail through it and just try to wrap up and finish your pleadings. Trick of effective rebuttal. Rebuttal. What is rebuttal? A rebuttal is more like a cobra attack. It doesn't run back and forth. It's a one-time hit, which is more like this. Let's say if I'm the responding party, I'll do something like this, that the claimants have failed to discharge the burden of proof with respect to this. Therefore, the breach has not been proved or anything of this nature. Thank you. How much time did it take? 30 seconds, 40 seconds. You have to keep your rebuttal short, crisp, only one statement. If you have to explain your rebuttal, I'm really sorry, but that's not a rebuttal. That's an argument. I've seen some students doing rebuttals where they say that you have to refer to page 39, then you have to refer page this of this case law, then you have to refer something else, and then there is no statement. A rebuttal is something like a statement which is against the other party. As simple as that. For example, the claimant has failed to discharge the burden of proof with respect to this. Thank you. You don't have to explain your rebuttal. It's more like a cobra tag. It's just one time hit. It's not 4 points, 5 points, 6 points. I know that some of the Indian competitions also provide for a very long rebuttal, like 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. But check the rebuttal timings of any international moots, it's 1 minute. Okay. And people say 1 minute, but you shouldn't use the full 1 minute. You have to wrap up your rebuttal in 40 seconds. Okay. And whenever you just finish your rebuttal, you just say thank you, which gives an indication that you have already completed your rebuttal. Okay. So, and in the rebuttal, please understand this. When let's say if I do the rebuttal and Rafik is on the other side, Rafik cannot come up with a different point of rebuttal. Rafik has to respond to my rebuttal. Some of the students, they come up with a different point. It's more like I say about point A. Rafik is talking about point Z. It's not a match. So please understand this. A sir rebuttal has to be a reply of the rebuttal. Okay. Now let's look at the other rules for winning in the orals. You have to be daring, you have to be different, you have to be the first. When I say first, for example, in the room, if let's say the rule book provides that the parties are free to decide in between themselves that what should be the order of pleadings, you should be the first person to talk to the judges and say that this is what the parties have agreed. Consider illustrative objects, creating examples. You should personalize your pleadings. No jokes, you shouldn't start cracking jokes. Within the rounds, you shouldn't laugh too much. You have to be very professional and you have to be very suggestive of spontaneity. You have to be smart. You have to use examples from real life to make sure that you convince the judges with respect to your pointers. Respond to the other side is very important. Let's say if you are the respondent, the claimant has A, B, C. You have to respond to point A, B, C in the same order. And you have to say that you are going to mirror the structure of the claimants. Because if they are using A, B, C, you can't do C, B, A. Because then it's very difficult for the judge to understand the pleadings. And you get bonus points if you are able to do that. Create visual image. What does this mean? This means that if you are able to create an image in the minds of the judges that you guys are the good guys. I actually don't care how good your legal knowledge is, how good your oral advocacy is. If in my mind I'm of the opinion that you guys should win this case, I'll give you more points. So that is something which you have to keep in your mind, that you have to convince me that I should go with your client, not the other side. Okay, which means that you have to show that you are more than a lawyer, and you have to use some real life examples to do that. Now, about questions, responding to the questions of the judges is very important. Please understand this. Some of the judges are going to only mark you on how you are going to address those questions. Okay, whether you answer the questions. Now, you must have seen this, that when some of the judges ask you a question, the students say, "Thank you very much for your question." Some of you say that this is an excellent question. Some of you say that this goes to the heart of the matter. Now, all of this, does it actually, what do you think? Should you thank the judge for asking you a question? What do you think? Anyone? Somebody is saying no, but isn't it very respectful, very appreciating of the judges? Let's say if Professor Kalpesh is my judge, he asks me a question and I say, "Thank you very much for your question, Professor." What's wrong with this? Because this is more like a trend in the Indian news. What's the problem with this? Why, whether we should do this or not? It's only one answer. So, Shiva, are you saying that you should say thank you for your question to motivate judges? Okay, I'll give you another Classic example for this. Some of the students also say that if the members of the tribunal are satisfied with my answer, can I proceed to my next point or my next issue? Should you do that? First is thank you very much for your question when somebody asks you a question. Second is that you say that if the members are satisfied, I'd like to move on. Can I move to the second part? Anyone who can unmute and answer this? Guys, the idea of this session is to make sure that you understand these pointers, and it's very essential for me to use these examples. Otherwise, you'll not be able to understand what I'm trying to say with this. Okay, so I think the
Sir.
majority of you, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. I think it is good to say the same way you have asked, because if judge is asking question, so and we are saying thank you, so it realizes that he is also on the question is very strong. I think so that.
Okay, I think that's the majority view here on the chat also. Now let's discuss these 2 pointers. One is thank you for your question. Two is the whether you are satisfied with my answer or not. The first part, thank you for your question. Let's say if I ask you that, I ask you how was this course? How was this training program on Moot competition conducted by VMSCL and law teachers? You ask me this, or I ask you this, and then the answer is thank you very much for your question. Does it actually answers the question? That's one. Second pointer to think about this is you have 14 minutes to argue. If you keep on saying thank you very much for your question, it will at least take 2 minutes out of 14 minutes. So you are already going to lose 2 minutes, then you are left only with 12 minutes. Some other team who has prepared this well in advance will not do this, so they'll get 2 extra minutes, 12 plus 2. So you're already out of the competition, isn't it? Just because of this. One is thank you very much for your question doesn't answer the question. Second, it takes your time. Yes, Priyank.
So, as we are discussing about that thank you word, but I have heard that in court we shouldn't use that thank you word. Uh,
I didn't get what you are trying to say. You are saying you shouldn't say thank you?
yes, but in place of that, we should use that much mobilized word or something.
Okay. Let's change the nomenclature because you are saying it. So should you say much obliged your lordship for asking me a question? Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir.
But does that even answer a question? No, right? Understand this. When you ask a question, I'll give you a very relatable example. Let's say that you call your mom dad and you say that I want iPhone 16 Pro Max. You know what they say? They say thank you very much for your request, your question. Does that even answer? No, right? So you shouldn't, and the nomenclature, thank you, much obliged, indeed, whatever you call it, that's something which will take a lot of time, that doesn't answer. So you shouldn't do it. Second part of the question, which is if the members are satisfied with my answer, can I go to the next point? Now, this is something is very problematic. Why? Let's say you say this in front of me. If I'm in the panel, you know what I'll say? I'm not satisfied. Why? Because you are giving me room to ask questions. And then you are asking for my permission. Now, understand this. If after every point you keep on asking me this question, this will again take 2 minutes of your time. So you're not even having 14 minutes of the total time. You're having only 12 minutes or 11 minutes. You understand this? So you are actually having 3 minutes lesser time than all the other teams which has practiced this beforehand. So instead of asking this, what you have to do is, let's say if somebody asks you a question, you answer that and then you say, that actually leads me to my next point, which is blah, blah, blah. Do you understand this? You don't ask for whether you are satisfied with the answer. It's already out. Second is that you don't ask to go to the next point. You just convey that that actually leads me to my next point, which is blah, blah, blah. You save at least 1 minute of time. Because if you ask this question, you have to pause. The judge will say something, then you can only proceed, right? The pauses also take some seconds. So you
Yes,
have to
sir.
be very smart. Okay. Now let's look at the next point. Do not defer the question. So you must have experienced this, that somebody asks you a question and then you say that this will be dealt by my co-counsel because it's not my part. That's very, what should I say? That's not what the judge is expecting from you, right? So what you should do at that point of time is you give a one-liner answer. When I say one-liner answer, it means this: yes or no, followed by the word because. Just give me a. You say yes or no, followed by the word because, and one line of reasoning, and then you say, however, this will be dealt in detail by my co-counsel. So you have answered the question in short, and you have also said that it will be dealt in elaborate manner by my co-counsel. So it's very respectful also. So please do not defer the question. Be very respectful to the tribunal. If they ask you a question, you have to answer it. Doesn't matter whether it's your part or not. But that's why you have to know all the parts. Okay. Structure your answer. We have already discussed it. Keeping it short and simple. We have already discussed it. Okay, Anirudh has a question. Does it mean that if I know the answer clear, I should say thank you for asking a question, and if I don't know the answer and I say thank you for the question, then I give improper answer will affect the presentation? I'm really sorry, but this is very confusing. I never said that you should say thank you for your question. Doesn't matter whether you know the answers or you don't know the answer. For a very simple reason, when somebody asks you a question, they look for an answer. They do not look for your thank you. The second reasoning is that it takes some time and you are already having 14 minutes or even lesser than that. So you shouldn't do that. That's my answer. Okay. Okay. Now, what if you do not know the answer? What you should do? Please understand this. If you have written CLAT or any competitive exams, you must have experienced this. That let's say in my time when we wrote CLAT and the paper pattern was something like this: 2 hours, 120 minutes, 200 questions, 20 questions on maths. Okay. Now let's understand this scenario and then I'll compare it with the mooting part. 20 questions on maths. If one question, my ego is stuck, I spent 10 minutes. If that answer is right, after spending 10 minutes, I get 1 point. Right? 120 minutes, 200 questions. I spent 10 minutes on one question. Is that a better way to deal with this kind of examination, or is it better to go with something like legal reasoning or something like legal GK, who was the first Attorney General of India? Because if I know it, I know it. And it doesn't take a lot of time. 30 seconds I read, I encircle it, I get 1 point. So is it better to spend more time in the maths question where I don't know the answer just because my ego is stuck? Or should I go and look at the next set of questions? Because 120 minutes, 200 questions is too much. A similar analogy is something which you have to apply right here. If you don't know the answer, you just say that I'm not sure about this answer. Can I go to my next point, which is blah, blah, blah? Because there may be a chance that you get more points for the other pointers and you can convince and get the confidence of the judges on those pointers. Understand this. If they are not satisfied, if they are not happy with your most strongest answer, do you actually think your second best answer or your third best answer is something they'll buy? Not really, right? So it's better to stop and move to your next point instead of going back and forth and losing all the time. I have seen some of these students who are at their third, fourth minute, they get stuck. They do not say that I'm not sure about this. Can I move to my next point? They spend another 7, 8 minutes on the first issue itself, which is not convincing, and then they get 1 minute to argue for the second issue. Now, understand this: the other team, the same competition, same room, the other team make sure that they argue both the issues almost around 6 minutes. Who should get more points? Forget about the merits of it. The time management, oral advocacy points, you already get it, right? Because one team was stuck at one of the pointers. You please don't think if you don't know the answer, you are going to lose out. You are going to lose out when you get stuck on one point and you are spending 5-10 minutes. Okay, so you have to be smart about this. If you think that you have given your best answer, that's not convince the judges, you should just move on. You should just say that I'm not sure about this, can I move to my next point? And I'm sure that the judges will say, okay, please proceed. Okay. Okay, now dealing with nervousness, deep breathing, all these tactics, a lot of different people do. It's person to person how you do it. Some people actually, do a lot of practice in front of mirror. Some people do it with video recordings. Some people write down the whole script, they rehearse. So it depends on different personalities how you want to do it. Some students also do a list of questions, which is more like an FAQ, which provides for the most frequently asked questions, their possible answers, structured feedback. Every time they get some feedback, they write down, they find out which are the parts where they have to work upon, they do video recordings. Practice, we have already talked about this. And post orals is the debriefing after the oral rounds, let's say the pre moots or the practice rounds, or even with respect to the main oral rounds, you should do a debriefing that what things went good, what things went bad, and you should actually take good positive feedbacks. You should request for feedback from the arbitrators, from the judges, so that you know where did you go wrong, so that you start working on it. And after that, some of the students I have seen that what they do, they work on the same subject matter of the moot problem and they start researching into that. So this is something which I wanted to discuss with you guys. And if you have any further questions and I'm not able to answer this right here, please feel free to connect to me. You can email me or you can just drop me a message with this QR code and I'll get back to you. But I think we have some time left for the questions, so you can, of course, ask questions now.
Okay, participant, any question query? We have more 10 minutes, I would say. Any question query from your side? You can drop in the chat box or you can straight away ask the question. The question like, please explain more about pleadings.
It's a very wide question. Can you be a bit specific? Explain more about pleadings, as in the structure, or what is that exactly? Why don't you unmute yourself and help me understand your question?
Yes, Michelle.
Okay, I understood your question now. So the example is this. Let's say that you get a judge who asks a lot of questions. So in that setup, what you need to do is, let's say somebody is asking you a lot of questions. So you need to preempt that if you go on with the pleadings you have prepared, for 12, 13 minutes, then the other person is asking questions which will add another 6 minutes, then you go beyond your time. So you have to switch the gear and you have to use your shorter pleadings. I'll give you an example. Let's say that the total time allocated to one speaker is 14 minutes. If I have to go for that moot, I'll prepare three set of oral pleadings. One is 4 to 5 minutes, other one is 8 to 9 minutes, then 12 to 13 minutes. If I get a judge who's asking a lot of questions, I'll go with a shorter pleading, which is more like 4 to 5 minutes, where I have only the most important points to be argued. That's it. Why? Because I don't have time to argue a lot of pointers. Because the judge is asking me a lot of questions. And please understand this. If you answer the judge's question, all of them, you are already going to the knockouts. Forget about your pleadings, what was the structure. If you are able to answer the questions which they have asked, you are going to the knockouts. So please don't think if you are not complete your pleadings, if you are not able to complete your structure, you are going to lose out. The judge is going to give you marks out of 100. If they are of the opinion that they ask you 10 questions, you answer 10 questions, you get 90s. Once you get 90s, you go to the knockouts. But if the judge is asking you some questions but also listening to your pleadings, then you have to use the middle version, which is more like 7, 8, 9 minutes. But somebody who is not even asking you a question, then you have to argue for 13 minutes, right? 13, 14 minutes. So this is what I meant by three different set of pleadings. Now, this is something which you can't do it at the spur of the moment. You have to prepare yourself before you go to the oral rounds of the competition. Now, how you prepare is very simple: practice. Yes, Rafik.
Sir, earlier point we had discussed about the when judges asked to stop and conclude. So whether we consider it is a positive point or negative point.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question. Can you?
Sir, if judges ask us to stop and conclude, so what I think it is a positive for me or negative for me, that approach of the judges.
No, no, I don't think. Okay, I understood your question. Please understand this. When a judge says please conclude or please wrap up, it's not positive or negative, it's very neutral. So let's say if you have 14 minutes, you're already crossing 14 minutes. Of course, me or Professor Kalpesh or any professor from the VMSCL, anyone will say that please conclude. It's not positive or negative. It's more like we have to follow time. Okay. But positive negative impression comes, let's say that you are stuck at one point for 7 minutes and I'm your judge. I say that why don't you move to your next point? Maybe you get the opinion, you get the indication that I don't like your arguments. Not actually. I'm actually trying to help you. Why don't you move to the next point so that you get more points? Because you are not able to convince me for the last 7 minutes. Why don't you go to your next point? I'll give you another example for this. Let's say you are a very good mooter. You started with a issue. I asked you a question. You answered it in 30 seconds. Then you started. Then you start to explain the answer. I say, please proceed to your next point. It means that I already understood your answer. So let's save some time. Why don't you go to your next point? So this is what I call reading the judges. A judge always tries to help you majority of the times. I'm not saying all the judges try to help you, some of them don't, but the majority will try to help you so that you go back to your structure and you go back to your pleadings. So this is what I call how you read your judges. So you have to do practice rounds to understand that what the judge is trying to do with you, whether the judge is trying to help you, whether the judge is trying to do a back and forth argument with you, whether the judge is testing you. And understand this: a judge who asks a lot of questions, if you answer those questions, that judge is going to give you the highest points. Instead of being angry with that judge, being reactive to that judge, making faces to that judge, you have to think in your mind, if I answer these questions, it's more like a free hit. If you hit it for a 6, maybe the next ball you get +6, because you get into the good books of that judge because you are answering all the questions. And this is the testing point in a mood, because everyone can actually mark up all the pointers, they can have a script, they can argue it, but the real test comes when a judge asks you a question and they actually detour you from your main pointers, from your main set of rehearsal. Then it becomes the real test. So please understand this. If somebody is asking you a question, that's very important for you to answer. Okay? In very short, crisp way, which means one word, yes, no. You have to answer. Some people just explain the question, they don't answer it. There is no yes, no, there is no because. And after because, it's 5 minutes of reasoning. Nobody wants you to give you a dissertation viva, right? The judge wants you to give answer yes, no, because one line of reasoning. That's it. You have to keep it short, simple. Any other questions?
Sir, I have also one another question, if you allow me.
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. While you're explaining various times that do practice. So while you're doing mooting, your the that time. So how you practice yourself with your friend or alone or using mirror like this? What you suggest? Sir? Can you just give some points on this?
Okay, so what we used to do, One is that the video recording thing. We used to do this video recording, we used to compare it with the finals of the YouTube, then we used to make notes. The other one is we were doing it internally within the team. So let's say if I and Kalpesh sir are a team. So let's say if I and Kalpesh sir are the speakers, so you become our judge and we do the practice round. You give us feedback, you ask questions and all. This is internally within the team. Then we also had coaches. So the coaches used to do the practice round. They used to give us feedbacks. Then we used to also approach people who have done that Moot, who are seniors to us, who are working professionals, who used to judge this Moot. So we used to do the practice rounds with them. So this is how we used to do it. So, but video recording helps a lot because sometimes you think that you are being very respectful when somebody asks you a question, that you have a smiling face, you're not reacting. But when you video record yourself, you see that you actually react to the question. You start making faces. When somebody asks you that, I have two questions, one, second, blah, blah, blah. And majority of the times, students don't answer the second one. There is a trick for that. Whenever somebody asks you two questions back to back, you have to write the keywords. If you don't write the keywords, in my experience, 5% students have only answered the second question. And people who do that will get brownie points for sure. Now, this is how you actually get to know all of this through practice. Very simple. I see that Professor Kalpesh has put up uh, his comments with respect to presenting compendium. Okay, now compendium, it depends on different moot competitions. Some of the moot competitions have detailed guidelines whether you can use it or whether you can't use it. Some of them are silent on this, so you have to read the rules first. But let's understand the usage of compendium. Some of us think that if I create a compendium of 500 pages, it's this much thick and it has flyers, a lot of flyers. Every time I say a case, I should ask the members of the tribunal to refer to that particular page and I should get more points, which is not true. I know this is the trending view in India that you have the more thick the compendium is, the more flags it has, the more points you should get for referring it to it. But understand this, if the most important point is something which is already, I'm arguing, I'm saying it, what is the use of the judges to flip pages and go there? Because it takes a lot of time. And if you overdo it, let's say you do it once or twice, it's very good. But let's say if you keep on doing it, it takes a lot of time. Then the argument part is less than referring, if you compare it to referring to the compendium. Instead of spending time in referring to the compendium, you should spend more time in referring to the problem. Okay, and use the factual matrix, compare it with the precedents, with the case laws. You get points for that. You don't get points to say that I'm referring to this case. Why don't you refer to page 39 of the compendium? And this is something which I said is provided there. That adds nothing. But what adds? If I say that there is a Supreme Court landmark judgment in NN Global 3, which says that arbitration agreement, even if it is unstamped, it's enforceable in nature. There is no problem of invalidity. I say this, then I say on page 39 of the problem, it is provided that there was no stamping done. However, if we apply the factual matrix of NN Global, we see that there is no issue of validity. In this regard, we conclude that the arbitration agreement can be enforced. This is what is more important than actually overdoing the compendium part. So first is that we have to look into the rules. Second, you shouldn't overdo the compendium part. You don't get points for this. If you look at the Westmoot marking criterion, there is no point for referring to the compendium, but there are points for referring to the record because Westmoot has a moot problem of 60 page. Stetson pretty much same. Jessa pretty much same. So if you are not referring to the record, not referring to the problem, then what are you referring? You are just using some legal cases to argue it without even applying it to the facts. So this is my 2 cents on use of compendium. Sir, when you say any input on grooming, as in what do you actually mean by that?
Yeah, no, recently we did 10 days program on soft skill. Grooming is
Okay,
not about like having a very
I got
great
it, sir.
suit
Soft
and,
skills. You mean
gown
how?
and other thing.
I got your question, sir. So you are saying that how students should actually groom their soft skills so that it helps in the oral advocacy. This is something which is very less talked about in India. Very good that you reminded me of this, Professor. So understand this. I'll give you one example of what Professor Kalpesh meant. A lot of us have this issue when we give a speech. Some of us have a habit of speaking like this. Members of the tribunal, my name is Akash Gupta, and I'm going to argue with Professor Kalpesh. Do you see the sound every time? Now, this is something which is very natural. A lot of us, especially in the Indian subcontinent, we have this issue. If you meet people from this subcontinent, you will see this. I'm not saying that this is bad or you should get a deduction of marks because of this, but please understand this. When you go for international moods, if you are not groomed enough, that you shouldn't have this sound. One problem of this is it's distracting. Two is that it's something which is, you know, it gives me an image that you have not practiced well, you have not trained well. It's not very attractive presentation. So how you should actually take care of something like this? Very simple. Again, go back to your practice rounds, video record yourself, you'll see this. But the problem is, how many of us do practice rounds? If you don't do a practice round, if you don't do a video recording of this, how will you get to know what are the problems with your speech? Now this is one. How you remove it? It's very simple. This is what we have been trained. Instead of this, you take a pause. For example, members of the tribunal, instead of a sound, you just take a pause. My name is Akash Gupta. Together with Professor Kalpesh, we are representing ABC in the case of ABC versus XYZ. Very simple. You just take a pause. But this is something which you can't do overnight. You have to practice this. Once you practice this, then you work on this. Now, this is just one part. The second part is also your hand gestures. Some people have an habit, for example, Rafik refer to, sometimes your voice is louder and then you make some noise on the table with your hand. Now that is something you have to avoid. Now, using hand gesture is fine, but overdoing it, let's say doing like this or doing like Sunny Baji in the movies, it's of course going to attract penalties. Third example is voice modulation. You must have experienced whenever I'm saying something, I have a voice modulation in it. But let's say if I have this presentation in this tone. Dear students, my name is Akash Gupta and I am going to deliver a session on oral advocacy. Do you see any voice modulation? It's super boring. Even if, let's say, I have to sit through a lecture like this, I'll sleep. Why? It's not because I don't have merit in my session, because my voice, there is no voice modulation. It's flat. So what happens? It is not very attractive. This is the reason why you need to have a voice modulation. So voice modulation, words per minute, then talking about the sound, talking about hand gestures, all of this is something which I think Professor Kalpesh referred to as grooming. Now, this is something which is not related per se to your precedents, your case laws, or let's say your legal journal articles. Not really. But this is something which is going to affect your 100 marks in the oral rounds for sure. And some of the international competitions like WIS does not calculate or count in your marks for the memo to take you from 374 teams, 400 teams to the top 64. It's just your oral rounds which is going to take you to the knockout rounds. So please be very careful and be very smart about this. Okay, Shiva is asking, in the moot court they provide mic. Not necessarily. Usually, like the setup is like this, that the judges sit in the middle, on both the sides the two teams sit, and they are not very far. So not necessarily, unless until you reach the finals for sure. Because if you go to the finals, especially in a law school like Jindal, where you have this auditorium, then of course you'll get mic. But not in all the sessions, because sometimes, majority of the times, the classroom. But if you reach the finals where it's an auditorium, then of course they will be giving you a mic. Okay, I
So I
see
think
another question.
yeah,
Yes, I see.
Kushi, raise your hand. Kushi.
Yes, sorry, Kushi.
Okay, we'll take up last question, Kushi, if you are there, and then this one from GT Shah.
Yes, sir.
What are the tips you would recommend for the researchers to be followed during oral rounds? So, I think repetition, but again, you can conclude with this maybe.
Okay. So, with respect to the researcher, what a researcher can do to showcase teamwork during the oral rounds is something like this. Let's say if I'm the claimant and you are my researcher. I'm the claimant, I argue, then let's say the responding party argues. The researcher should help me with framing the rebuttal. That's one. Second, researcher should also try to make some notes throughout the session. What are the things which goes well with the judges so that it can help me for the next rounds. Third is that the researcher should also write their own feedback plus the feedback of the panel for the next session. Fourth is that let's say if I'm stuck somewhere and I need the help, that the researcher should help, which means that researchers should throughout the session should be involved within the rounds. The researcher shouldn't be looking at the window. You get it? That's one for sure. It's a red flag. So you have to make sure that you are involved. You write notes, you write the feedback, you help both the speakers with framing of the rebuttal. You write notes, you write the feedbacks, you write also your own feedback so that your teammate should get some help from you for the next rounds. Now, this is something which I will recommend.
Okay. I think there are, oh, yeah. So there are no more questions, participants. So thank you very much, Akash, for your valuable time and great input, I would say. And this will be my first experience to listen something on the oral advocacy. We were the bad moot. I wouldn't say the bad mooter, right? I participated only one time. So so it's a good, like, and you rightly stated, it's all about the practice, right? How much you practice, right? Definitely written part is the research, but again, the third part is, oral advocacy, how, the body language and soft skills that I will discuss. So thank you very much for this great insight, and then look forward to seeing the final session tomorrow. And then thank you, participants, for joining for today's session. Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye. Good night.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Good night.